Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Deep Thoughts. Today, I'm talking about a very important thing, very special topic that I've learned about very recent. Be a little more serious this episode. And not to say we can't, joke around a little bit. I believe highly in making light of certain things in certain situations. But for the most part, we're going to keep it pretty serious. Today, I wanted to talk about something I've been researching recently. Like I said, something I've just found out about not too long ago. That was even a thing. And I'm going to try my best to convey this information. Now, if you know me, you know I'm not the best at giving a A+ presentation or writing that A+ paper. I'm, and lack of better words, I'm not a smart man. I try my best. I have my thoughts. I want to convey my thoughts. I've done, some research over the last several weeks. If you don't like it, that's fine. If you're watching or listening to this, and I always advise people, first and foremost, to do your own research. Anyways, to, if you feel like my research isn't good enough, or you didn't learn enough, or want to learn more, or you can always, do your own research. Discussion is always invited here at Deep Thoughts. I have no problems with that. And if you want to tell me my podcast stinks, that's totally cool. But I just hope, out of respect, I can at least try to convey this information as well as I'm capable of. Today, we're talking about a group of people called the Hmong People. They are an ethnic minority, a part of the Meow ethnicity. I'll be looking at notes a lot here, sorry. One of the subgroups of the Meow ethnicity in southern China. They are from the mountain regions of China, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand, which, as we'll learn, they've had to migrate to these countries over time, over history, due to various historical things happening. So, yeah, I never heard of, the Hmong people before. And they are, of course, just one of hundreds and thousands of, different ethnic groups that have existed over time, of indigenous people, of different, tribes and tribal people, different native people, that have existed throughout the course of our history. It's amazing how people can live and exist and have lives and never really be known about, by some people, or forgotten, dust gets kicked over them and they're just, quite literally a part of, history that may or not be forgotten. So that's why I really, really was interested in learning more about these people. Very interesting stuff. So through oral tradition, which is a big thing in the Hmong culture, the evidence from that and archaeological finds, they suggest that the Hmong people originated near the Yellow or Yonks rivers. And again, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing things. I'll probably do that throughout this whole thing. It's not out of disrespect. I'm just going to try my hardest. Not everything on Google has a pronunciation thing. But yeah, the Yellow and Yangtze rivers are also known as the Yangtze River, that river is the longest river in Asia and the third longest in the world, and the longest in the world to flow entirely within one country. Fun fact. Supposedly, yeah, this is where the Hmong people originated, around this area. They were known as very good farmers, very industrious farmers. Their farming skills and other craft skills have always kind of been sought after. And this is how they've also, been able to survive, trade, make money, things, of that sort of thing. They make things, they farm. They're actually attributed to being the first, maybe the first people to cultivate rice, which of course is, a staple in Asia now and has been forever. And it's just, very important in life in general. Rice, especially like I said in Asia, I mean, that rice has helped people during different periods of time, different conflicts, different droughts, survive, in wars, where rations are low, rice has helped people in Asia literally survive. If you were a prisoner of war, most likely, in a southeastern Asian country, you most likely were just having to live off rice. So that is a very, very big deal, very important contribution by the Hmong people. And early written accounts show them living, in China since about 2700 BC. But following conflicts in the Han Dynasty, in I guess an attempt by China, since then throughout history has been trying to, I guess, unite all people of China, but throughout this unifying, they have seemed to have left out many other groups of people, specifically indigenous or ethnic minorities. They have been left out of this whole uniting of Chinese people throughout history, and instead they've been more so oppressed or forced out of their lands and forced to move into other lands. So with following, certain, like I said, conflicts, there have been many uprisings that have been suppressed by Imperial China, by these, by not just the Hmong people, but other ethnic minorities around that area. More about them, about kind of, before we get into like the nitty gritty, I really want to talk about just kind of, because I love history and I love to get into people and history and how they lived during their time on this earth, and just seeing how things were really different. Especially, in either time periods where it just wasn't technologically advanced, but also specifically like just indigenous tribes or tribal people. I'm very interested in how they, lived life, had fun, what they ate, just picturing people in their native countries, looking at pictures of Laos and seeing just, some of the beautiful areas, modern day Laos, and just trying to picture tribal people and indigenous people in those same areas, with their huts and just living their life, daily life, doing their daily routines. I don't know. There's just something about it. I love to think about daily life throughout history and how people have lived and what they did with their time. It's just fascinating to me, but I also think it's very important to look back upon. All history is important to learn from. But so the Hmong people, they have different groups or clans, and it's very based on like colors. For example, you got the black Hmong, the white Hmong, the green Hmong, and their names usually are their clan, like their color or so, with their last name. If I'm getting that right, hold on. Your clan name would be first when you introduce yourself, which would, like, for example, okay, so it would be like the color first and then your name. So, like, for example, if your name was Kong and you're a part of the Green Hmong or the Ham Hmong, you'd be Ham Kong. Or if you're part of the White Hmong, that would be Tog. And if your name was Kong, you'd be Tog Kong. Stuff like that, man. Stuff like that's very cool to me. But not only were they distinguished by the color of their clothing to give them their identity, and whatever clan they were a part of, but their clothing had a lot to do with who they were and where they were from and what they did. For example, like the white Hmong were typically associated with reverse applique, sorry, which is a way or it's an ornamental needlework, how to make clothing, which pieces of fabric are sewn or stuck onto a large piece of fabric to form pictures or patterns. The green Hmong were associated with batik. This is all from the arcgis.com. I'm posting all my sources. Don't worry. I got lots of sources. I will post them all. So yeah, how they made their clothes. And can we also just kind of just stop to say how fascinating it is? Again, just to think about how people came up with ideas to make clothing, just by using the plants and things around them, coming up with sewing techniques, just thinking about people first coming up with that, like the dawn of time, the beginning of time, that people's brains knew how to make clothes, just by grabbing the things around them, certain different plants making different dyes of color. I mean, if you look at some of their clothing, I mean, it's so vibrant and colorful and beautiful. To think that they were making these kinds of clothes thousands of years ago is just mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. People are amazing. They still are. I know people don't like people these days. We all hate people. Oh, I hate people. People are the worst. Rah, rah, rah. People are amazing when they're at their, best, I guess. I don't know. People can be very amazing, very smart, innovative. That's who we are as human beings. That's what our consciousness is for creating things and things for us, for our people, for our families, for survival. Since the beginning of time, we live in this world now where everything is so industrious and factory and machines, like you would never know how clothes used to be made. Now it's all done in machines and factories. I'm sure some stuff is still like handmade, but the way that people used to have to do it was just such hard work. But still, they were able to make amazing things. Amazing. So that's like a little bit about like their clans and their clothings and how they distinguished themselves from one another. Their language is a part of a Miao family of language. It's a branch of Chinese, Tibetan, and Austro-Thai families. So it's a real blend of different people and cultures around them. And you'll also see that throughout the Hmong history. Not only did people kind of borrow from their craftswork and their things and their food and ideas, but the Hmong have also borrowed from the people around them as well to create their own, culture. Especially like food, their food is a mix of a lot of different cuisines, which, like it says here, according to, I'll just list the source later. I don't have to say it all the time, but it's a mix of different other countries' cuisines that where they picked up, through their migration. It consists of many spices and herbs, chilies, cilantro, ginger, green onion, garlic, mint, of course, fish sauce and oyster sauce, which is a big thing, of course, in Southeast Asia. And, of course, usually served with rice. They're not big on dessert, which I find interesting, too, to learn. They're not big on sweets, but they do have one famous dessert. It's called Nam Van, or also known as tricolor. It's like a tapioca mixed with like sugar. Let's see, Hmong tricolor. Oh, it looks so good. Knob Vom, 3-color dessert. Just all these recipes, but nothing that just says exactly what it is. Like tapioca, coconut milk. Um, it's. I'll just show a picture of it. It looks real delicious though. But that's really the main dessert they're really known for. So like I was kind of saying earlier, or maybe I didn't touch on it yet, but rituals are a big thing in Hmong culture as well. Shamanism is a huge thing. Animism specifically is very big, which is like the idea that everything has like a soul or spirit. Like every object, like a rock, this microphone, maybe this computer desk is all kind of like got a soul, or maybe not soul but a spirit of some sort. Shamans, like I said, were very important in their society and culture because of the rituals were very important for healing, for meditating, for contacting loved ones, contacting the dead. So they look to shamans for many different reasons. To go through some of these rituals, like I said, soul calling. Here, according to PBS.org, the Hmong religion is traditionally animist. Animism is the belief in the spirit world and the interconnectedness of all living things. At the center of Hmong culture is the Zivnib, the shaman, literally father, master of spirits. According to the Hmong cosmology, the human body is the host for a number of souls. The isolation and separation of one or more of these souls from the body can cause disease, depression, and death. So, very big on believing in the soul, which comes from, doesn't come from, but again, you look at a lot of ancient peoples, they were very focused on the soul, even in Greek history. I think I touched on it in my consciousness enlightenment episode about stoicism and the belief in that, and how we have a soul, and we kind of have like two things going on in our brain. So they believed in some of that stuff as well. Curing rites are therefore referred to as soul calling rituals. Whether the soul became separated from the body because it was frightened away or kidnapped by an evil force, it must return in order to restore the integrity of life. So that's soul calling. They also have string tying, which is one way in which a shaman returns the soul to the body is through a string tying ritual. White, red, black, or blue strings are tied to shield the person from evil spirits in the form of sickness. These strings signifying the binding up and holding intact of life souls. So another big one I want to touch on is the funeral, the Hmong funeral. So when a Hmong dies, his or her soul must travel back to every place the person lived until it reaches the burial place of its placenta. Only after the soul is properly dressed in the placental jacket can it travel on to be reunited with ancestors, to be reincarnated as the soul of a new baby. So just like many other religions, I think Buddhism, I guess specifically like South or Asian, Eastern Asian religions, and in India too. Like I said, I think lots of religions. Again, I'm not the most educated, but believe in reincarnation. That's a very ancient, old way of thinking about life, and maybe it's true. I'm not saying it's not. I don't know what. Just like everybody else, nobody really knows what the truth is. Nobody knows if there's heaven or hell, reincarnation, purgatory, whatever. Everyone has their beliefs, but they believe in reincarnation. The Hmong revere their elders and believe that anyone who is not accorded the proper funerary rites, being washed, dressed in special clothes, honored with animal sacrifices, verbally guided back to where the placenta is buried, lamented with musical instruments, laid to rest, will have a lost, naked, and wandering soul. So funeral rituals often last 3 to 4 days. So, a lot different than your typical funeral where you go, you see the body, you cry, you have a little 30-minute thing, and you go watch your loved one be put into the ground, and then you go eat Chick-fil-A after. For 3 or 4 days. It's really important for them to do everything right for that soul, for that person, to make sure they took the right path into, being laid to rest peacefully, and could also be reincarnated. So, yeah, interesting stuff, man. Like just like shamans, and like I just said here, elders were very revered, and elders were a very big thing, and to be an elder, it didn't have to be, you didn't have to be some really old person that's like 80 years old, or like an elder could be like a 40 something year old person, as kids in the Hmong culture had, or people, sorry, had kids at very young ages, sometimes 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So, of course, the grandparents would be grandparents, in their 40s. And by that time, though, they are the elders. They're very respected for their experience with life, through the knowledge that they've gained through their life. And that's something that I always keep in mind, I love listening to older people, specifically because I know, like, I don't want to say that they're smarter, but that experience in life is important. And it's hard to drive that into a younger person's head who may not have respect for people that are older than them. And that's very common, especially these days with teenagers. And I've had my history of showing a lack of respect to older people, something I've really tried to turn around in the last several years as I've, opened up and listened to older people throughout the last few years. I've learned just so much, they really, people who live longer lives, not necessarily always, but generally do have just more experience and wisdom to share, and it's important to listen to that. Even if you think they're just talking a bunch of gobbledygook or something, or a bunch of crap, just listen, it's important to take it all in. And that's how you learn and grow as a person. You take everything in, and you pick out this or that, and you think that's important. Maybe that's not important, but you got to take it all in first, all the information in, before you can come to your own conclusions. I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but again, listening to elders, and respecting elders, very big in the Hmong culture, as it should be. It should be more in our own culture. So, this is a little bit about the Hmong people and who they were, who they are. Now, their history is very shrouded in. They don't have a whole lot of history to look at, or like that I could at least find. Like I said, and you're more than welcome to do some deep diving, and you could probably find a lot more than I did. But because they've always kind of been dealing with problems of cultural identity and gaining independence, and they're like I said, also I think oral tradition very big in the Hmong culture, because they weren't people that learned to read or write for a very, very long time. That wasn't a thing in their culture. So oral tradition, just telling their history, was a huge part of it. So there's not a whole lot of written history to look back on. But what you do notice throughout reading about the history of just Eastern Asia and China specifically, there have been many uprisings by indigenous and ethnic minorities. In China's attempt, supposedly, to unify all people of China, they have also stepped on, oppressed people, kicked them out of their own lands, which again finally forced the Hmong people to migrate into places like Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, those countries. One story I did find very interesting, where a lot of this may have all began, was with one war that lasted like 10 years. It was fought by two people, the Yellow Emperor and Chiyu, who is known as kind of like a mythological, he's been kind of given a mythological character, and is the god of war, actually, in their culture. And when I say mythological, I mean, like, they give him a persona, like he supposedly has like when they make statues of them and things like that, or drawings and stuff, they give him like 4 eyes, 6 arms, or horns of a bull. But he is a real historical figure who was really in a war. He was a tribal leader of the Nine Li tribe, which was part of the White Hmong, as well as other ethnic groups. He was highly revered amongst these people, and he was apparently just such an amazing warrior. I don't think those people probably had anything to fear behind him, but he went to war with the Yellow Emperor in a 10-year war, and he was beating the Yellow Emperor for most of it. A lot of this is from Wikipedia, but Wikipedia has its sources. There's a whole story, about this war, and again, given it that mythos, they use words to describe, Chiyu as having, use a breath of smoke. He used a breath of smoke to fog his enemies. And who's to say that didn't literally happen in some other way? Maybe he created some smoke device, or maybe he was able to fan the smoke of fire to his enemies to blind them. But there's verbiage like that he breathed and created this huge thing of fog to just distraught his enemies. And so there's this war, and then the Yellow Emperor was being beaten until he teamed up with someone else. Why don't I have the link to this? Because it's very interesting to read. So, okay. So it wasn't essentially with the Yellow Emperor. Let me back up. It was the Yan Emperor. He was leading his tribe in the conflicts with the Nine Li tribe, or with Chiyu. And Chiyu was beating him until the Yan Emperor teamed up with the Yellow Emperor. And the Yellow Emperor supposedly invented the South-Pointing Chariot, which, let me look that up real quick what that was. I'll show a picture of it. And with this invention, he was able to turn the battle around on Chiyu, and Chiyu was defeated. This resulted in, the White Hmong and the Hmong people and the other ethnic groups that were, part of the Nine Li tribe behind Chiyu. This forced them to kind of disperse and migrate, and really, I think, from what I've understand, made, set off the events that made the Hmong, into just indigenous tribal mountain people, instead of being culturally and independent and economically independent, and having, being their own people, with their own leader, and actually having a say in things, around them, in their own lands, in their own homes, and having their own homes. Supposedly the loss, of that 10-year war, was the last time they really had that I don't want to say that strength, or that cultural identity. After that, ever since then, they have just been fighting, like I said, for independence, and fighting just to be their own people, and just to live, and to live their life. It seems like something always comes their way as we continue to look through their history. So, the uprisings. There are many uprisings against China throughout history, specifically from ethnic minorities who were being oppressed by China. This oppression, I mean by, taking their lands, controlling their food, just controlling them and controlling the people in general, telling them where they can or can't live, taxing them, things like that. One of the... Let me see where I'm at here. And it was specifically in the 18th century, 19th century, from a result of the Meow Rebellions that really finally pushed the Hmong people to migrate to places like Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. The Qing dynasty used tyranny rather than forced assimilation towards their non-Chinese inhabitants. In the southwest since 15th century, in provinces of Yuan, Guizhou, Guangxi, and Sichuan, the most common way of rule was through semi-independent local chieftains called Tusi, on whom the emperor bestowed titles, demanding only taxes and peace in their territories. So, a lot of the times, the Hmong people would get, their own representatives, and those were the people that they had to rely on to go to, like in imperial China, and negotiate or discuss the needs of the Hmong people, and they would try to do the best for their people as they possibly could. Let's see. Man, I really just did not source this very well. So yeah, there was starting in 1735 to 36 was the first Meow Rebellion, and this is from the by the Meow ethnic groups of people, which included the Hmong people. Those were first rebelling or uprising against China for how they were being oppressed. The uprising, quote here, was one of the long series dating back to the Ming Dynasty's conquest of the area. Whenever tensions reached a critical point, the people rose in revolt. Each rebellion, bloodily put down, left simmering hatred and problems, which were rather suppressed than solved. Basic questions of misrule, official abuse, extortion, overtaxation, and lab grab remained. Mass Chinese immigration put a strain on scarce resources, but officials preyed on rather than ministered the population. The quality of the officialdom in Guizhou and neighboring areas remained very low. And this resulted in, like I said, uprisings in 1735 to 36, another Meow Rebellion in 1796 to 1806, and then the last and largest one in 1854 to 1873, this according to the Cambridge History of China. So with more going on in life, in history, things changing, countries changing, leadership changing, politics changing, so much just changes over time. And I can't imagine when you're just a people who has kept such ancient traditions around throughout your history, and you're, like I said, you're just trying to live, you're just trying to survive, trying to be happy, you're trying to be some kind of people, recognized as some kind of people, and you have, just doing it with your resources in lands that are very hard to survive and live in. You have all this other madness going on in the world, the American Revolution, which resulted just in a, massive impact on the rest of the world. You have all this going on. You have people traveling more, exploring more, and now, budding their business into, once again, these indigenous tribes and groups. This is from ethnomed.org. From 1790 to 1860, the Hmong fled south from Chinese persecution into Burma, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. In Laos, the Hmong lived separately from the Lao people. Actually, there has been tension over time throughout history. I think even to this day, I was told about by a good friend of mine, who I'll talk about a little more here, that there has been tension between the Lao and Hmong people because they've been so split through political events, and it's just really sad. We'll talk about civil war here too, when people turn on each other. When groups of people who live in the same area and are very similar, end up turning on and fighting each other. It's always very sad, and it sounds like that's what happened to the Lao and Hmong people. During the period of French colonialism in Southeast Asia, the French relied on the Hmong for their skills in weaponry and military service. So, though often treated badly by fellow countrymen, the Hmong excelled in government service positions as liaisons with the representatives of the French government. So, you could say that with the French colonialism, the French getting involved in Southeast Asia, helped things a little bit because they made use of the Hmong people, but it will turn into a series of events that, once again, did not work out for the Hmong people. So we see throughout their history, these are people who are used to being oppressed. They are used to being pushed and poked and prodded to the point where they feel the need to have an uprising or rebel. They fight back. They have always fought back. And unfortunately, they have usually been overcome, outnumbered, or against some other force that just has way more resources or a bigger army. And they've had to admit defeat so many times. And like I said, that has forced them to constantly migrate throughout their history. But they always get to a point where they do fight back. And that's very important. It's very important to note. So, history, man, it's wild. So you have French colonialism now, late 19th century, early 20th century, for the Hmong people in Laos and Thailand and Vietnam. And then you have the events of World War I that happened. And the events of World War I that I didn't see too much affect the Hmong people. But what it did do, of course, is spawn more political ideology, especially around that area and around Russia. And you see things like communism start to rise and start to build up. And this spills over to Southeast Asia into places like Japan or China, who has always had that kind of way of thinking anyways. But it only grew bigger and got worse and started to spread. So then we, get to World War II. And to the Hmong community, this is known as the Japanese War. And this is from the Minnesota Historical Society. The Hmong of Laos were divided into two factions due to internal clan conflicts. Most Hmong stayed loyal to the French and Royal Lao government. The rest joined the Communist Party. Or also called the Neo Lao Hak Sat, renamed the Petit Lao. The pro-French Hmong showed fierceness against the Japanese by rescuing, this is a pretty amazing story. They rescued the king Luang Prabang, they rescued the king in Luang Prabang, which is a big palace, very beautiful, who was being held by Japanese forces while they were extending their reach over Southeast Asia. As a result of this rescue, several Hmong leaders won national political positions. Tubi Lifong, with his brothers Tulia Lifong and Togo Lifong, were the first successful Hmong politicians in the Lao government. And under Tubi Lifong's leadership, Hmong assisted and hid French soldiers from the Japanese military, and they were finally officially recognized as citizens in Laos in 1947. Finally, right? In 1947. Just by fighting back. Once again, fighting back a regime or a political ideology that they were not okay with, that they felt maybe oppressive, once again, which is something that Hmong people know about, right? They did not, majority of them did not want communism, but again, the communism spilling in did split the people. It did. It made them feel like they had to choose one or another. So after World War II, unfortunately, that was not a war against communism. It was a war against Nazis and Nazi Germany. We worked with the communists, Russia, to defeat that enemy. But afterwards, communism still began to spread, and America supposedly was worried about this. They were worried about this domino effect that could happen. I can understand, it seems very plain and simple why America, or the idea of an American, or the idea of our country, supposedly being a free country, would oppose such ideas as communism. But I do question sometimes, was it always all about stopping communism? Everything, post World War II. Because I think there still is a threat of communism in this world today. Because for some reason, communism just doesn't stay put. It spreads. Because communism and socialism, which I think go hand in hand, socialism usually leads to communism. It's like a country can't just live that way in their country. It has to be always a part of some global effort to make the rest of the world that way. And that is, I think, a legitimate fear that America might have had or been going through, or other countries who, felt free or feel free. Especially after the idea of a free country with the American Revolution. A lot of people felt uncomfortable with this idea of communism. I think probably mostly because communism seems to be enforced on people a lot of the time. Well, for one, they always have backers. There is always some kind of support for it, but I feel like it's very manipulative. I.e., we need to crush this old form of government, and we're gonna do it through force, and we're going to give, they always call it like a liberty party. We're liberating people, we're the party of liberty, but really then it turns into, okay, now you have to do everything our way and this way, and you can't have that and can't do this. And, now you're taxed for that and taxed for this, and, forced labor and re-education camps and things get involved, that just show time and time again, just, if communism works, folks, we haven't seen it work yet because it seems to be always backed or implemented by people who don't give a crap about the people, actually. They always have some other agenda involved. It's not actually about liberating people. It's about enslaving people, in a way. So, with the fear of that, not just around the world, there was a fear of that specifically in Southeast Asia, with the creation of this, liberty movement, or also the Pathet Lao is what it would known to be called, was created. The other people in Laos who opposed that, the Pathet Lao, and were part of the French Royal Army. They were getting ready to fight. They were getting ready to fight this communism. And this introduced in 1953 the Franco-Lao Treaty, which was signed, which gave remaining French powers to the Royal Lao government, except for military. And in fact, let's see, I believe the Geneva Accords then came after that in 1954, which granted Laos its independence, but also barred the introduction of foreign soldiers. So interesting how those events happened and then what followed, as civil war would break out between the Laos people, the communists versus the anti-communists. The anti-communists were led by General Fumi Nosavan. And the Communist Party was supporting this guy who was a part of a mutiny or a coup d'etat against the Royal Lao government named Kong Lei. And so here you have these two sides. and they're getting ready to fight each other. Fumi is getting ready to march on and fight against the Kongle in the communists, in the Pathet Lao. So when the U.S. got word of this, President Eisenhower specifically, he was very worried that the communists were going to take over Laos, and the implications of that, i.e. the domino effect, they were going to lose Thailand. Here's a quote, actually. Here it is, by Naval Operations Admiral Arleigh Burke. He was quoted as saying in 1960, "If we lose Laos, we will probably lose Thailand and the rest of Southeast Asia. We will have demonstrated to the world that we cannot or will not stand to the challenge." So, was that the mindset, Did they fear that they were going to lose those countries, and then what? Then communism was going to spread all the way into America? Was there some strategic or some strategy to wanting to keep countries like Laos and Thailand, not, keep them under, I guess, not communist control? I guess I personally just struggle with that being the only reason why America had to get involved in this Laotian Civil War, because this is what it was. It was a civil war that was erupting in the 50s and early 60s. This is where America first really got involved. Well, I guess, you could say World War I, World War II, getting involved in other people's things, but those were real, I feel like more were so many W's, were more world threats. Whereas did this really threaten the rest of the world? I don't know. Because then you have, like I said, communism is involved. We're involved in a Cold War, or soon to be in a Cold War with Soviet Russia. And then you also have the China, that communist party and country that you have to worry about. If you do get involved in this conflict, you may have to worry about them as well. This was thought about very, very much so. And then, of course, the Geneva Accords, where they're not even allowed to bring troops into Laos. America isn't. There's also another quote from I think a Korean newspaper or a Japanese paper that said, as early as 9 years ago, the General Staff in Washington had calculated that the United States could keep the country, Laos, free of communists only if the president were prepared to send 300,000 GIs, use atomic weapons, and risk a 10-year war and possible intervention by China. Indeed, Washington did not get involved officially, yet the U.S. intelligence service, CIA, entrusted with Operation Laos, acted with the silent approval of the White House, State Department, and the Pentagon. So they got CIA involved. I don't know when exactly the CIA was created, probably around this time, or maybe in the 40s or something. But they left it up to Central Intelligence Association, the CIA, to handle this and to create an operation where they could fight this war without using American soldiers. This is mind-blowing stuff. I had never heard of this until my good friend, Uncle Milton Tarati, is a Vietnam veteran who has written almost, maybe now, 100, or maybe he's working on his 100th oral history. Where he writes oral histories for veterans, spanning from World War II to Vietnam, and talking to him, he wrote a book, an oral history for one of the soldiers in this, what is called the Secret War, this secret Laotian Civil War. And that is how I learned about all this, the Hmong people and this secret war. And what does that have to do with the Hmong people? Well, once again, as they seen an oppressive regime invading their country, they wanted to fight back. And there would be another uprising. This time working with Fumi Nasavan and also another general named Vong Pao. So the CIA recruited this man named Bill Lair, James W. Bill Lair. This is a quote: "Of special significance, highly respected and renowned Colonel James W. Bill Lair was a CIA operations officer to Laos from 1961 to 1975 with direct supervisory knowledge of the Hmong Resistance and Special Guerrilla Unit soldiers, or the SGU, and authenticated the DD-214 for this soldier who I said had an oral history written about her, who was a part of the SGU. Her name was Siving K. Suparat, or also known as Kimmy Suparat. And again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this name. All the respect in the world. I have nothing but respect for you, Kimmy. Colonel Lair, a veteran of World War II, Lair had joined the CIA at the outbreak of the Korean War. There's a great document I'll source too. Great document. The library.utdallas.edu. That it was an interview with Bill Lair on these operations. It's like a 99-page thing. And how, he took up an intelligence job and, didn't even know what it is. That's how people get recruited into the CIA, I've learned. It's just like an intelligence job posting, and people just looking for a job, especially like military people are like, okay, I'll go into that. And then it turns out to be you're leading operations in a secret civil war that the American public cannot know about. Keep your mouth shut. Very interesting. So he was tasked with creating an operation. And the operation that he came up with was to recruit Laos natives or indigenous people like the Hmong to fight this war instead. And these people would be backed by the U.S. through means of weapons, training, and food supplies and other supplies. So Bill Lair met with this General Vong Pao, also known as VP, who was, wanting to fight the communists as well. So there's this real urge by these people in Laos to fight communism. There is. So when an American comes to them and says, hey, look, we'll help you fight the communists, there was a real hoorah for it, They were happy for the assistance, and they were very confident that they would win. So Bill Lair met with Vong Pao and was like, you need to recruit an army or basically get out of Laos. And so he's like, oh, I can recruit an army of like 10,000 Hmong, easy. So he recruits the Hmong people who are willing and wanting to fight the communists. So these people, this SGU, or Special Guerrillas Unit, is created. There was also a paratrooper unit, or PARU, that I think was made to coincide with this Special Guerrillas Unit. But these people were but the Hmong were trained in this Special Guerrillas Unit, and they were provided weapons and all these things. Also, this was under the cover of an agency known as AID, or the Agency for International Development. The U.S. Authority for Development Assistance, the CIA, recruited a secret army of about 36,000 men from among the Miao tribes and prepared it for civil war. And this undeclared war in Laos became known in Washington back channels as the Secret War. Initially, the CIA tried to keep the Laotian monarchy in power. When this proved to be impossible, America supported Lao, Hmong, and Miao guerrillas fighting to protect Lao. So they recruited this army. They've recruited the Hmong people to fight the communists. You could just look at it two different ways. Like I said, it was a real war maybe that needed to happen. And for America to get involved, when you read about it, like I said, a lot of the Hmong people were very grateful for that help. But was America's intentions, or did they do this the right way? That's to be debated. With such little knowledge of the area, the country, the culture, it may have been destined to fail. Like I said, it's such a strange concept. Recruit the natives there. We'll back them. We'll support them with our weapons and stuff, but we won't step foot in there because, the Geneva Accords, and we'll help them fight this war that we want them to fight and that they want to fight. Sounds all good, right? I just don't know, though. I just don't know. Something just sounds real fishy about it still. So, the U.S. supplied food and weapons to the Hmong soldiers through airdrops from Air America. During this time, Air America, which was just a regular flight service before this, became operated by and controlled by the CIA during this time. Covertly, totally secret. Air America was being used for covert missions, reconnaissance missions, I think that's the word, and dropping supplies for the Hmong people. They did this throughout this whole secret war, and it's pretty amazing. They had a huge impact on keeping things going. So during this fighting, during the early '60s, General Fumi and Vong Pao seemed to have been winning against the communists. They took over this area called Plain des Jars, or the Plain of Jars, which is again a place I never heard of. An amazing piece of history, clearly. One of those things, kind of like Easter Head Island or whatever. It's just kind of like, it's literally this plain with these big giant stone-looking jars. I'll show some pictures. It's pretty amazing. It's just like one of those things that's like you don't know how they got there, what they were for. Obviously, put there or made by ancient people for some reason. Maybe to catch water in or something. I don't know. Very fascinating place, but it became a very bloody battleground during this war, and it was a very strategic place to have for like air operations and for artillery and things like that. So they ended up taking that back from the Pathet Lao, and through the Air America supplying them, it seemed like they were really winning the war. Well, then, of course, the communists get backed by the Soviets, and that's a powerful backing force as well. I'm providing them with tanks and weapons and things also. The communists took back the Plain des Jars and started winning against the Royal Lao Army and the Hmong people. Bloody fighting, very bloody conflict. Once again, seeing groups of people just killing each other, And I'm not saying it didn't need to happen. You hate to see those things happen, but once again, the Hmong people, along with other groups of people, were fighting for what they believed their freedom. They were fighting against the communists. They didn't want communism in their country. They were willing to die for it, die to fight against it. And so they did. Then, of course, it wasn't until 1965 where American troops finally entered Vietnam, and Vietnam fiasco finally came out to the public. And it was spun as this narrative to fight communism. Even though the Vietnam War was brought to the public and American troops were able to go into Vietnam, the secret war behind the scenes was still going on and was still not known to the American public. So now you got American troops going to Vietnam, fighting the North Vietnamese, while also the North Vietnamese are in Laos fighting the Royal Lao government, or Royal Lao Army, and the Hmong people. And slowly over time, Air America started dropping less and less supplies. And this really, really affected the Hmong people and the people fighting against the communists. Supplies began to dwindle, food began to dwindle, and they started to lose more battles. There's one specifically, the Lam Son 719, I believe it was called. Operation Lam Son 719, or Ninth Route, was a southern Laos campaign. Was limited objective offensive campaign conducted in the south eastern portion of Laos. The Lam Son 719. During this operation, the ARVN withdrew from the fight and conducted mainly along Route 9, ran from March 17th until March 24th. North Vietnamese ambush on the 19th of March littered the road with wrecked vehicles. Artillery pieces were abandoned, and a good many men had to make their way on foot to landing zones for evacuation. American media carried pictures of ARVN soldiers clinging on the skids of U.S. helicopters. This is from Milton Terati's Oral History. The South Vietnamese lost nearly 1,600 people. The U.S. Army lost 215 people, and 1,149 were wounded and 38 missing. The battle raised disturbing questions among Army officials about the vulnerability of helicopters in mid or high-intensity conflict to any significant anti-aircraft capability, since there was helicopters, involved, and they were being shot down during this. It was a big, I think, turnaround in things. And did you go potty? Good job, baby girl. Good job. All right, I'm almost done, okay? And then I'll come sit with you. I think it was a big turnaround for things in this secret war. Again, also going back to the Plaine de Jars, it was incredibly bombed, so totally bombed, one of the most bombed places ever during war. And also to note that I learned Laos has had the most bombs dropped on it compared to its size ever. And I don't know if I worded that right. It's I believe in this book, Milton described it as Michigan size. Laos had tons and tons and tons of bombs dropped on it during this war. It's incredible. The bomb to population ratio was crazy. So many bombs compared to the population and the size of this country. Insane. And people didn't know that it was happening. So Air America stopped supplying and they started assessing the risk, especially Air America, reassessing this risk of continuing to do these flight missions as some of them were getting shot down. So they're pulling back. The Special Guerrillas Unit, the SGU, starts losing battles. Vietnam turns into a total crap show. It looks like we're losing that as well. And eventually, this all leads to 1975, where America is finally pulling out of Vietnam and Laos and admitting defeat in this war. Especially with the goings-on in America, with all the anti-war going on, anti-Vietnam war going on, they couldn't push it any farther. I mean, they were already in this country for nearly 10 years. And of course, the secret war was going on even longer, but they never talked about that. But it was time for them to withdraw troops, I guess, from Vietnam. And this withdrew all help from Laos. And there was an attempt to rescue refugees from Laos, but it was a small attempt. It was like a 3-day thing where planes would come at a certain time, and you had to know about it. So thousands of people, Laos and Hmong people, didn't even know when these rescue planes were coming. And so tons of them missed out on being sent to refugee camps in Thailand. And the communist takeover went into full effect to where there was a near genocide happening. They started killing everybody, capturing everybody, and throwing them into POW camps. And when I say killing, I mean killing. I mean, the Mekong River apparently was flowing with bodies from a genocide, basically. They were just shooting people, and especially people who were trying to escape down the Mekong River. They were just mowing them down. And I don't mean to be so gruesome. Hey, Misia. Be a little bit quiet. Thank you. I don't mean to be so gruesome about it, but this is real. This is real history. This is what really can happen to you as a person, a part of a group of people, as a person, a part of a nation who stands for certain ideals or ideas. You never know when you're going to have to fight, and you never know when you're going to be taken over. You never know when people are going to start gunning down in the streets. I know there's a lot of problems in America. We're not to that point, but people turn such a blind eye to the signs that point that we are headed to that point, i.e. signs of a civil war. Sometimes it feels like people want a civil war. We're always constantly being poked and prodded as American people to be divided and against one another, especially by race, especially by religion. It's not hard for me to imagine Americans turning on each other and killing each other, and in turn allowing a new form of control or government to swoop through and take over, i.e. maybe a communist government. We would be thrown into camp so fast. I'm telling you, history repeats. There's so much truth to that, and that's why you need to learn as much history as possible and learn about people like the Hmong people and see what they've gone through. And to see what they've gone through and to see what they have fought and laid their lives down to fight and why they fought and why they died for these things. It's important to know why people died in the American Revolution and why they fought the British, you know. It's very important to know why people fight and die for things, you know. Very important. So, many people were left in Laos to be controlled under the communists and to be put in, either killed or put in POW or re-education camps for decades to come. It was it. That was over. America went back to being America, you know, went through the 70s and the 80s came, and, you know, all sorts of new conflicts arose during there, but we pretty much stuck our nose out of the Eastern Asian stuff, but things didn't end there, you know. So this veteran that I mentioned, Kimi Superat, is very important because the Hmong people, the people who fought in the SGU and fought in the Secret War, were never really. A lot of them were, like I said, a lot of them, you know, some of them were saved and some of them were sent to refugee camps, and then a lot of those people migrated to the U.S. After after the war, like 350,000 plus Hmong people and Laos people migrated to America. Again, this is the oral history by Milt Taradi. About 40,000 Hmong fled to Thailand in 1975, and more followed the next few years. Most Hmong and other Highlanders were housed at the Ban Venia refugee camp. The U.S. did not initially contemplate resettlement of Hmong, believing that they would be incapable of adapting to life in the U.S. Lobbying by Americans who had worked with the Hmong caused a change in policy, so 140,200 Hmong and other Highland peoples were resettled worldwide from 1975 until 1997, the great majority in the United States. They continued this resettlement program until 2005, and in 2004 taking in 9,201 Hmong who were living at the Wat Than Krabok in Thailand. So for decades, for like 20 years, there were still people in refugee camps in Thailand, also still people in POW camps in Laos. People that died there, people like Kimi's father, who was a very revered soldier in the Royal Lao Army, ended up dying in one of these POW camps. Kimi Superat is very important because finally Well, first of all, let me state that, like I said, a lot of these Hmong resettled in America, but the veterans who fought in the Secret War weren't really recognized, i.e., they weren't able to receive VA benefits even. So, according to Kimmy's story, she was not able to receive any VA benefits. And her story is most amazing because she was left in Laos when the communists took over, and she was put in these POW camps and refugee camps. She had to bear a son in one of these camps. Luckily, she's got to stick with her husband most of the time, but eventually was separated from him. She was separated from her brother and sisters, and her mother, and she survived in POW camps for 9 years, over 9 years, until she, with her husband and her child, and she was also pregnant with another child, escaped, and she traveled very, very far to get to one of these Thailand refugee camps. And if you read about it, escapes didn't happen often, and when people were caught, they were killed. Again, her story is very amazing. And she's the reason why I have learned about the Secret War and the Hmong people. Her connecting with my friend Milton Tarati, who has told me about this and shared this oral history with me. I can't, thank them enough for sharing something like this with me. And I'm very appreciative that I'm able to learn about it now, at least. Better late, better now than never, So yeah, many got to resettle in America. There's a very big Hmong community, and a lot of them that resettled in Minnesota and Wisconsin. That's where a lot of them reside. And like I said about the VA benefits, finally with Kimmy Superat getting involved and reconnecting with a general who I will give a shout out to as well. General Sar B. Futasak, who was a radio operation person, and later a general, who has helped, who's reconnected with Kimmy and has helped translate her story. And they have all, including with Milt Tarati and another person who worked on this oral history, was Robert K. Bob Like. And they have all been fighting for VA benefits for the Hmong people. And it's finally even reached Congress. They've made a lot of progress with this. And I think there still is some progress to be made. I still don't think they have received VA benefits, but they are fighting for it now. Once again, the Hmong and people like Kimmy Superat, who's a part of the SGU, she is fighting for all those people and all those, the rest of the remaining SGU veterans and Hmong veterans who fought in that war to finally receive VA benefits, something that should have been given at the get-go. She is fighting. They are still fighting. They are fighters. The Hmong people are fighters. They've shown it throughout their whole history. They will stand up and die for their freedoms, for their people, for what they believe in. When they feel oppressed, when they feel like they're getting put down, shoved out, they will fight. And if you're a part of that culture, I highly commend you and I respect you. And if you hold on to those cultures and you know your history as a Hmong person, you're a fighter. And I'm so glad that some of the people got to resettle in America with new lives, and I hope they're doing very well and are very happy. But it's still sad to see the things that they had to go through that led them to this point. So that is My thoughts on the Hmong people. It's been a very emotional journey learning about them. Very educational one, and I'm very glad, like I said, I was able to learn about these people and their history and the secret war that went on behind the scenes of the Vietnam War. I'm sure there's so many other things like this to learn about, so many different wars and battles that I've never heard of that have resulted in why things are the way they are today for people, why people are resettled in certain countries, why certain countries are certain countries, why certain countries have certain borders. Everything is a result of battle and war and politics and people changing things over time. You hope for the better. Sometimes the bad guys win, though, too. Let this be, again, a learning lesson of maybe communism's not great and maybe never will be great. If you are even somebody who considers the idea of communism being a good idea, especially for America or for you or for your own country, wherever you are, look at the people who have died to try to fight it off. Look at the people like the Hmong who know about oppression, who know what it's like to be bullied, and, you know, learn from those people and why would they fight communism. They obviously didn't think it was a good thing for them. Learn your history, folks. It's very, very important. I'm trying to learn as much of it as I can now. I think that's going to do it for this episode today. Once again, I'll leave all my sources in the description of this video. The oral history, that's a little thing for me. I don't think I'm sharing that with anybody, but I did hope at least I shared some of the things from it, and I hope people were able to learn some things from this great oral history written by my good friend Milton Tarati. And I'll leave all the other sources down below that I used for this for reference. Hope everybody stays safe. Hope everyone's doing well. I pray that we will never have to fight in a bloody civil war like so many people have, like the Hmong people have. I hope that will never have to happen in our country, because it would be a bad, bloody one, and it would be sad to see. Remember to think freely, think often. I love you guys, and we'll see you next time.